and remove your 6 lug nuts with a 21mm socket. And remove your wheel. Go ahead and remove this cap here. Mine already has a little indentation. If yours doesn't, just use a hammer and a pry bar. Try to get the pry bar in between this lip and the hub and just pry this cap off. There we go. Now on the inside you'll see a cotter pin. You're going to have to remove that. Remove this little locking cap, and with a 36mm socket, remove your axle nut. At this point, you want to make sure that the axle pushes through the hub. Looks like I'll need a hammer. If yours does not move, use a punch. Go in the center of the axle. You don't want to damage the threads. And drive it through. Go ahead and remove these two 19mm bolts. Now you can lift up on the knuckle, and as you pull it away, you can pull the axle out. Let's get a big pry bar and pry right here. Before you pop the axle out, make sure you have a collection bucket underneath because it's going to leak fluid. Perfect. Try to separate this inner joint. Now support your axle and pull it out the rest of the way. I'm going to cut this inner clamp off. Alright, remove that clamp. Now you can pry the boot off and separate the joints, or the joint. Right here you'll see a snap ring with some snap ring pliers. You're going to want to put those in here and try to expand that snap ring. While it's expanding, I'm going to insert a pick to hopefully grab it. Now you can pull this end off. Keep this together. Set it aside on a clean surface. Cut the inner clamp. Now you can remove the inner boot. Throw this away. Now for the outer boot, go ahead and remove that clamp. Now we have to remove this outer clamp. And now you can pry the boot off. I'm going to cut it right here just to make it easier for it to come off. So I used a bunch of rags. I scooped out as much grease as I could out of here, out of these joints here, and out of this inner or outer CV joint. Once you've cleaned out as much grease as you possibly can with a rag, either use brake parts cleaner. If you're at home and don't have a parts washer, make sure you have enough of this. Basically, you want to get out all the old grease that's in there. That way, if it's just like this one, if it's really bad, really poor condition, you can add in all of your new grease and it won't mix in with the old one. At this point, I'm going to go to the parts washer and try to degrease it and get as much out as possible on all these components. This is clean now. It has had time to dry, and you'll notice in your kit you'll have two different types of greases. You want to use the white tube, which is the darker colored of the greases, for this outer joint. So squeeze all of it in. I'm going to do a little bit at a time and try to work it into these bearings here. Squeeze out as much as you can. Put it all in there. Now you'll notice you have two boots, a smaller one and a larger one, and it's kind of self-explanatory because the smaller one has these cutouts here, and that's for the outer joint. So you're only left with this one. Slide it up and over and match it up. Try to take your boot and, without making too much of a mess, press it onto this outer joint. There we go, perfect. Now we can grab the clamp. I'm going to try to wipe it up a little bit. At this point, keep in mind if you flex it all the way, the boot might pop off. Now you'll notice you have two different size or types of clamps. There's this one that gets folded over, and then there's this one that is non-adjustable and it gets pinched shut. You want to put this one on the outer joint. So slide it over, and once it's on here, you can do this with other tools, but they do make a special tool for this. You grab onto these two ears and you just squeeze it really tight, and that's gonna lock it on. Make sure it's seated properly all the way around and squish it. Perfect, that's locked on. Press this end of the boot on, has to go over the lip where it locks in. Perfect, there we go. Wipe off some of the excess grease here. Now take the smaller of the two small clamps, slide it on here. Grab your special tool again, or whatever you have to squeeze these shut, and clamp it. Make sure it's still seated where it needs to be. Perfect. Before you put this end on, go ahead and slide the clamp over the boot and put the boot on. Bring it down all the way. Now take this piece, slide it down, and install your snap ring. The way I'm going to do that is start it on one end, hold it, and then with a little pry bar, I'm going to try and spread it open and press down at the same time. That's going to start the snap ring on, and I'm going to press it all the way into its groove, all the way around. Make sure it's properly locked in. All right, perfect. This can't go anywhere. The boot is on. Now let's get the outer joint in place. Now you want to take your other packet of grease and put all of it in here. I'm going to put a little bit on these areas here. That way it doesn't start up dry. After the axle's together, the boots are on, everything's secured, I'll move it around by hand just to work in the grease. But I want it to start with some grease in there and fill the boot with the rest of it. Now you can install this piece, slide it over, make sure the boot lines up, and press the boot up and over where it locks on. Perfect. Now get this clamp, slide it over, grab some needle nose pliers so I can grab it. They do make a special tool for this, but pliers works too. Fold it. Now there's a special tool to close these up. A lot of times you can, or sometimes you can press these down by hand, and then you take your hammer and very gently fold these two ears over. That's going to lock in this clamp, and now that's all tight. Now the last clamp that's left is this one right here, and the supplied clamp looks like it needs to kind of squeeze together here, which is not always easy. Perfect. That's nice and tight. Everything's still seated. And just to lock this in, make sure it's secure. Gonna lock that down. Perfect. Now you can take your CV axle and work the grease in. Go in and out with this joint, but just make sure you don't pull it out too far. You don't want to separate it. Make sure the bearings get lubricated. Same on this end. All right, now let's put it in. Go ahead and reinstall your axle. Try to line it up. Make sure you don't damage the seal, and if your seal is leaking, now's the time to replace it. Line it up with the splines. I'm using the weight of the axle and the play of the inner joint to basically whack it into place. There we go. Eventually it'll snap in. Make sure it's fully seated. Perfect. Now we can put it inside the knuckle. Perfect. Drive it through the bearing. Now you want to line up your two bolts here and start those on. All right, that one started. Do the same to the other one. It's easier to line up the second one. Now let's snug them up. Torque these bolts to 103 foot-pounds. The knuckle's going to want to spin with the tie rod, so I'll bottom it out. There we go. Double check this one. Awesome. Reinstall your axle nut, bottom it out, and then we'll torque it to 217 foot-pounds. I have a pry bar going through the lug studs here to hold the hub in place, otherwise it's going to want to spin. Torque this to 217 foot-pounds. Perfect. Now reinstall this locking cap. Make sure the cotter pin hole lines up. Reinstall your cotter pin. Make sure it goes down through all the way, and lock it on. Bend it over. Now reinstall your cap. Make sure it's seated all the way. Let's get the wheel on. Reinstall the wheel. Start on all 6 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and then torque them to 83 foot-pounds. .83 foot-pounds in a star pattern. Perfect. Your fill plug for the differential is going to be right behind the driver's side CV axle. I'm going to put a 10mm Allen head in there, hammer it in. A lot of times these get very rusty. Break this free. Remove the fill plug all the way. And the fluid for this application is going to be 75-85 gear oil. Now I'm going to insert some fluid until it comes out of this fill plug. That's when I know it's full. All right, looks like it's starting to come out. Perfect, that's full. I only lost about half a quart, so not a lot came out. Now let's get the fill plug back in. Snug it up. Perfect. Now take it for a road test.